Welcome, everyone. Welcome. It's good to have you all here this afternoon. And I just want to encourage you guys to fill in a little bit closer, if you don't mind. So when she's presenting, she can look at you guys in the eyes. So welcome on a little closer. And I'm just going to pray, and then we're going to have a little welcome and invite our speaker up. Loving God, thank you for this wonderful day. Thank you for the blessings that you've given us already today, God. We just pray that you would bless us today, God, that your spirit would abide with us, that you would bless those who are on the way and give them safe traveling mercies. And God, if some people are going back and forth, should I go, should I not go, help them to make that decision and come out. And may you bless our relationships, our relationships with our kids, with kids in our lives, or just us in general as we navigate changes and challenges in this world today. And God, we pray blessing on our church, on our school, and on our community, on the city of Reno, and the surrounding area, God. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. So I just want to welcome you all here today, and wanted Haley to say hi too. If you don't mind saying hi to everyone. Good to have the church and the school here together, really prioritizing. Haley's on our elder team, for those who didn't know. Really prioritizing the importance of caring for our kids and making them resilient. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to our presenter because I know she has some incredible things. Doctor, right? It's not doctor. I just crowned you doctor. You should just receive it. Amanda Anguish is blessing us here today.
Loan payments to become doctor. Thank you. Actually, when I was in my master's program 20 years ago this year, I remember telling my teacher, one of them asked, do you want to go and get your doctorate? And I said, nope, I am going to write a book and I'm going to get an honorary doctorate from a university that just wants my name associated with them. I still haven't written my book, but that's because I'm busy and you have to have a lot of motivation to sit down and write a book. So I have important. Well, according to a woman or a psychologist, Dr. Angela Duckworth, bouncing back from failure turns out to be one of the best lessons a kid can learn. Did you know that? One of the best lessons a kid can learn. It matters more than even intelligence, skill, or grades. But what do we often focus on with kids? Get good grades, get a good education, do all these skills and things like that. But we don't realize that, does it really matter if they're good at all those things if they give up easily? If they cave to frustration or challenges? None of that matters unless they have grit to go with it or resiliency to go with it. In every case, and she studied every single kind of kid out there, since 2005, in every case she found that grit, not intelligence or academic achievement, was the most reliable predictor of a positive outcome. Most reliable predictor. So what are the challenges that are affecting kids nowadays? Do you ever think about that? I do all the time, because once you get to a certain age, you're like, wow, generations are changing, things look differently. One of the big things I've noticed is the internet. I didn't have that growing up. And so all of the things that the kids that I work with, I don't work with kids in the group home anymore, but I do work in private practice with kids, and I see some of the things that they're inundated with, and most of it starts with online. But these are some other things. Emphasis on feelings, focusing on happiness. Do you notice that? Years past, generations past, what was the focus? Duty. Now the focus is on happiness. But what happens when you don't focus on duty? You'll never have happiness. If you don't accomplish things and you just focus. We'll talk more about that later. Passive parenting. There's usually two different types of parents. Passive parents, even in the media, I read an article years ago. A woman was noticing as she was watching the Disney Channel that, and if you do this now, you'll see it. How many parents do you see in shows for kids? Do you know we even had this before Current, though? Peanuts. Have you ever thought about how much involvement did parents have in that show? None. And if they were in the show, yes, you got it. What were they doing? Wah, 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 wah. So what were the kids suggesting? Tune them out. Don't hear what they say. It doesn't matter. So it started earlier, but now if you watch any children's program, almost predominantly no parents are involved. And some will even, the kids are at a coffee shop, you're like, how did those kids get there? They can't even drive. They're like 12. But you don't see the parents involved. In my generation, most of the shows, like Little House on the Prairie maybe, there was lots of parent involvement. Lots of parent involvement. But what's the other side of the ditch? Aggressive parenting. Helicopter parents. I call it lawnmower parents. What are lawnmower parents? They get in front of their kid and they shove everything out of the way. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. You don't have to do anything. And so we try to get rid of all of it because what are we trying to do? Make sure that they have it better than we did. I've got a really good quote on this one later. How about instant gratification? Do you know what television does to the human brain? It suggests that every problem can be resolved in 30 minutes, an hour, or an hour and a half. Is that how life works? Sometimes you have to wait weeks. I have prayed for things to resolve for 6 years, 5 years, before I saw any outcome of it. But now we expect a pill to fix it. We expect, it to just go away really quickly. And then what happens if it doesn't? I give up. I don't want to deal with it anymore. We even ghost people, cut them off. How about social influencers, media, and cyberbullying? This is big. I won't even go into all the dark things that I hear from young people when they get involved in cyber this and underground chat rooms that. It's scary stuff. If you're not watching your kids on the internet, be very scared. Be very scared. Politics and pandemics. Do you know what was the largest pandemic before COVID? We had a pandemic before COVID. Did you know what it was? Loneliness. Do you know it was so bad that in the UK, the British Parliament came up with a new position called the Director of Loneliness? How would you like your business card to say that? What do you do for a living? I'm the Director of Loneliness. Maybe it should be the Director of Togetherness, because I think that was really the goal of the position. But a lot of these things are going on, and people don't realize that they're happening. We focus on things like COVID and all the stuff going on in the news, but we don't realize there are other pandemics that are happening too. Focusing on money in the future. A lot of kids, ironically, think they're going to become influencers. I'm not going to do any work. I'm just going to be really famous one day and make a lot of money. So many of my kids in the group home, I'm like, oh, what do you want to do for a living one day? I'm going to be a rapper. And I'm like, oh, do you write music? And then they would share their newest song, their rap with me, and all they had done was taken quotes from other rappers' rap songs and put them all together as their own. I was like, that's strangely not yours. But even athletes, oh, I'm going to be a famous athlete. Do you play football? No. Like, well, you kind of have to practice that. You can't just think that you're going to become that. Medications and mental illness. Do you know we have more therapists? Well, I'm in a different state right now, but do you know we have more therapists in the state of California than all other states combined? You're not too far from California. But do you know we have more therapists than we have ever had in generations past? And guess what we also have more of? Mental illness. We have more mental illness than we've ever had in the past. How about fantasy versus reality? Anybody been to a Barnes & Noble recently? What is entirely in the young adult, kids, and teen section of the bookstore? It's all fantasy. Almost everything is fantasy. Very little reality. Most of it's like anime, fantasy. Those are basically the two main ones that are there. Those are the main things that kids are facing. They're living in a fantasy, not reality. And then you add the internet, that's another fantasy or unreality that they're living in too. And lack of stability and reliability, which equals a lack of God in their lives too, because who is the only one that is truly stable in an unstable world? God. I want to look at some biblical examples of kids. We see the story of Samuel. He had a mother who, through self-sacrifice and great care, taught her son the difference between good and evil. She herself had been treated unkindly and probably taught Samuel resilience in response to evil and focus on God's goodness and care. I'm sure he had a very similar situation that Joseph did. Do you think he was probably the popular one? I don't think so. And Samuel was able to stay pure in the face of poor influences in Eli's home, but not just in his home, in the sanctuary. He was even made an exception to the priestly duties because he was such a pure child. He was able to do those duties. We talked about Joseph earlier, if you were here. Jacob had his own struggles with learning to trust in God amid trials and even mistakes. His father, Joseph, must have called upon these lessons at the feet of Jacob when he was in the face of abuse and persecution himself. And Joseph, while treated poorly by his brothers, was able to stay true to what God had shown him in his dreams and stood for the promises fulfilled in those prophecies. And he was a shepherd and took care of sheep with all its duties and responsibilities. I don't know about you, but I think being a shepherd was probably a really good training school for Joseph. We don't hear too much about that or talk too much about that, but he was required through that role to do a lot of hard things. You're not around a lot of people. By the way, has anybody ever owned or taken care of sheep? Are they the smartest animals? I've been around sheep. We used to have, there was the person who owned the property that my office is on had sheep, and those sheep were the dumbest creatures I've ever met. They were so dumb. We would try to feed them. Well, one of my coworkers and I, we would take walks on the property during breaks, and we'd try to feed them, and all the sheep would come over to the person based on one sheep that was going over there. Then we were like, okay, let's see if we can get the sheep to get more food, because none of them got any food. It was always the same sheep that got all the food that we offered, and all of the others would just sit there and think that they were going to get fed next. So then what we did is we had two of us on either side trying to see what the sheep would do. Do you know all of the sheep followed the same sheep over here? And then when that sheep was done eating, the sheep would move over to the other person, and then the other sheep would follow that one. We're like, you guys, at least one come over here. They wouldn't do it. They weren't very smart. So I think Joseph learned a lot working with sheep. And adversity in childhood prepared Joseph for adversity and hardship in adulthood. One more from the Bible, David. Through experience as a young boy tending sheep as well. By the way, God seems to like to use tending sheep as a training field for his children. David was able to learn to trust in God and stood up to the wild animals affecting his care of his sheep. David was bold in the face of the giants and called upon God to defend him. Why was he able to do that? Because he saw God defend him when he was tending the sheep. David, while having human frailties and temptations, was humble to his sins and confessed and turned from his sin. And David was patient with Saul after learning from Abigail. She was a vessel speaking for God. And David learned from his mistakes and avoided temptation later on in his deathbed. So how do we role model grit to our kids? I want to use some examples in current society. Does anybody know who this is? If a guy knows who this is, I'll be very surprised. I'll just be a little surprised if a woman knows who this is. This is Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx. But I love what she tells us when you hear her story. She was refused over and over and over again her modern woman's girdle, if you call it that. All this nice shapewear and everything that is sold in very expensive department stores, I might add. But you know how many times she was turned down before she actually got a customer to buy her stuff? Somebody's still wondering what Spanx is that right? Yeah, so she was turned down over and over and over again, but she really believed in her product. But why did she keep trying even though she got turned down? Well, because every single day when she went home from school, she says at the end of the week, my dad would ask my brother and me what we failed at. If I didn't have something to tell him, he was disappointed. So what was he doing? He was desensitizing his kids to failure. In turn, what does that do? Makes them not afraid to fail, and in fact, they were challenged to fail. What does that mean? Trying new things they weren't used to doing. Do you ever think about that with your kids? How about with yourself? Do you know that that's the best way to affect your anxiety about something? We call it exposure therapy. If you're afraid of something, you know what you're supposed to do? Do it. And do it again and again and again and again and again until you're no longer anxious about it. I did this once because I am not very fond of heights. So you know what I did? Like any good person, I took up rock climbing. I don't do it anymore. It's hard to find people sometimes when you move. But I took up rock climbing. It was so scary. And I was doing most of it in the gym even. But I'm a little less scared of heights now because I did it. I like what Ellen White says. By the way, I think she should get an honorary psychology degree and a doctorate. She says, let the child and the youth be taught that every mistake, every fault, every difficulty conquered becomes a stepping stone to better and higher things. It is through such experiences that all who have ever made life worth the living have achieved success. She wrote this a long time ago. It's powerful even today. How about this person? Does anybody know who this is? No? Have any of you ever heard of the company called Google? Probably every time you get on your computer. Interesting. Did you know what Google did with their employees? I thought this was really powerful when I read this. Do you know they incentivized their employees by giving them, I think it was $20,000 to stand before the whole company and share how they had made a mistake? How many of you would sign up to do that? I think I might actually do that. I made a mistake. Whoops, tomorrow I made another mistake, and next day I made another mistake. But what was Google doing? Most people don't understand the power of why they did this. Why do you think Google did this? They would try more things. That's absolutely correct. But there's another main reason. Why? What do we often do when we make a mistake? We give up, but we don't even want to talk about it. So what happens when Google gives you a project or something to do and you can't come to the conclusion of it? Do you want to tell everybody that? Or if you make a mistake, do you want to tell everybody, oh, I made a mistake, I need help? Most of us don't like to do that. We want to shove it away and not talk about it. So what was Google doing? By the way, it's not some altruistic trying to teach people to feel better about themselves when they make a mistake, although that's not a bad side effect. They were trying to save money. Because what happens when you have this department working on something, they can't figure it out, or somebody makes a mistake, but somebody else in the company could figure it out. So that's why they had that person stand before the whole company, share what they did, how they made a mistake or how they failed. That way somebody in the audience could probably say, wait, you didn't try that though, and that would work. They didn't have to start the project all over again to figure it out They're saving themselves tons of money. And this is what he says, Astro Teller, the captain of moonshots for Google. You must reward people for failing, he says. If not, they won't take risks and make breakthroughs. If you don't reward failure, people will hang on to a doomed idea for fear of the consequences. That wastes time and saps an organization's spirit. Did you know Ellen White talked about this too? She says, children frequently begin a piece of work with enthusiasm, but becoming perplexed or wearied with it, they wish to change and take hold of something new. Thus, they may take hold of several things, meet with a little discouragement, and give them up, and so they pass from one thing to another, perfecting nothing. Parents should not allow the love of change to control their children. A few words of encouragement or a little help at the right time may carry them over their trouble and discouragement, and the satisfaction they will derive from seeing the task completed that they undertook will stimulate them to what? Greater exertion the next time. Ooh, I just lost my slides. Hopefully we'll get it back. What do we often do, though, when we're discouraged? We give up. We don't want to try it anymore. But what happens when we continue to try? Anybody ever try something over and over and over again and it took a long time but you finally got it? How does that feel afterwards? Very satisfying. This is why we should give things to kids that maybe is a little bit of a stretch for them to do, because little do we know, maybe they'll figure it out eventually. Okay, let's see. Where am I with my slides? Oh, okay. Well, the book, I'll go to the next slide even if we don't have the material in front of us real quick. So Angela Duckworth, the person that we originally talked about in that first slide, when she talked about the importance of grit and resilience versus just academics or skill and everything, she wrote a book called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And she said these are some qualities, 5 qualities that you can offer your children, or 5 things that you can offer your children in order to help them develop grit. 1, offer a challenge. So encourage them to take on new challenges each day. 1, promote perseverance. Sounds like what we just read about. Have them continue to try and try. You don't have to try all day. Maybe you try for an hour. Just try for an hour, and then tomorrow we'll pick it back up and see if we try for another hour what happens. Be a nudge. Sometimes we like to instead take over and just finish it ourselves. But be a nudge. Encourage them to keep trying. The third one, and this is one of my favorite ones, welcome boredom and frustration. What do most kids want every single day? Even those of us that didn't have all of the stuff that kids have now, what did we used to say all the time growing up? I have nothing to do. Did you know that there is something very powerful that happens in the brain when you have nothing to do, when you're bored? It's called default mode network. Default mode network is the time when you're bored or you don't have anything externally stimulating to focus on, and it gives you the opportunity to start processing your thoughts and processing problems in your mind. You know what I did? I had an 1.5-hour drive this morning, and I said, I'm not going to listen to anything on the whole way. Do you know what happened when I got right before the exit? I started thinking about something so deeply, I actually missed my exit here. I was like, wow, the power of default mode network. I was so deep in my thoughts, I wasn't paying attention. And I had my phone sitting right there telling me where to turn off. And I saw it like 3 miles before. But I was so deep in my thoughts, processing things I wanted to say, challenges I wanted to take on, creative ways of looking at things in my life, that I totally missed my exit. Had to go all the way down to, is it McCarran? Yeah, had to go down there and backtrack the other way. So this is something that we want to encourage our kids with. Encourage them to be bored and frustrated. Also, let them fall and model resilience. How do we handle things when we struggle and fail? Do you fail well? Here's your imperative to fail well from now on. Your kids are watching you. They want to know that it's not so bad when you fail. You keep trying, right? What is it that Edison said? I didn't fail at inventing the light bulb or figuring out the light bulb. I found 999 ways the light bulb didn't work. So now when the next person comes along and decides they want to invent a light bulb, what can they do? Well, I'm not going to try those 999 ways. I'll try a different way. So this is one that I am actually going to talk about in the next hour, and this is asking questions. We are in such a hurry to get somewhere sometimes, and I don't mean physically, but even mentally. We want to figure something out. We want something to be done already, that we forget to ask our kids questions. And this isn't just for kids, it's ourselves too. One of the big things that I do is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy is asking what we call Socratic questions. Now, who was Socrates? He was a philosopher. What do philosophers love to do? They love to ask questions. Sometimes to the point of never actually answering them, but they love to ask questions. And Socratic questioning is merely, instead of answering something, like if your kid says, I need this, or I need that, or I don't know what to do about this, ask them, well, what would be your first option on how to fix that, or how to do that? Instead of just answering it for them, oh, you should do this, or go do that. This means we have to slow way down, though, as parents. We have to pull back just a little bit. We're not trying to find a solution, we're helping our children find the solution. But another thing that Socratic questioning does is it helps patients, in this case, in this study, examine the validity of their negative thoughts and gain a broader, more realistic perspective. So for instance, if I had a kid come to me and say, today I had the worst day at school, I wouldn't go, oh, I'm so sorry, that sounds awful. I would say something like, wow, the worst day at school? What is that asking the kid? Did I really have the worst day at school? And then I might ask something along the lines of, can you think of anything good that happened? Sounds like some bad or difficult things happened, but was anything good? What is this doing? It's training the brain to look at things differently than we normally do. We love to catastrophize. We love to magnify things. We love to mental filter, meaning we love to look at the negatives of things. But by asking questions, by the way, you can do this with your spouse too. Just asking simple questions like, wow, it was a great day. Tell me about that. What does great mean? You know, just asking those questions allows the person to think, especially kids too. We'll come back to that though in the next hour. Another thing to help build resilience, don't make it about money. Another research showed that goals are great, but not all goals. Money, beauty, and admiration, all the external things, were shown to lead to lesser feelings of satisfaction. Unlike the lasting benefits of caring relationships and hard-earned skills, the thrill of extrinsic accomplishments fade quickly. All too soon, the salary raise is a distant memory and the rave review forgotten. I've had the chance to work with some athletes, and some of them have made the pre-Olympic stage of things. And one of the things that I notice is, why are they seeing me? They're depressed. And yet, they're one of the best athletes in whatever category they're in. Why is that? Did that make them happy? Not that by itself. There has to be something more. And here's another quote that I hear so many parents say this, and you're gonna be flabbergasted if you haven't already read this quote by Ellen White. She says, "The circumstances in which a child is placed will often have a more effective influence on him than even the example of parents. There are wealthy men and women who expect their children to be what they were in their youth and blame the depravity of the age if they are not. What does that sound like? Have you ever heard people say, oh, kids today, they're not like they were when I was growing up, right? That's how we all say it. Listen to this, though. She's talking to that very statement. But they have no right. Who has no right? The parents have no right to expect this of their children unless they place them in the circumstances similar to those in which they themselves have lived. But what do parents always say? I want my kids to have better than I had. Listen to this. The circumstances of their father's life, maybe their mother's life as well, have made him what he is. In his youth, he was pressed with poverty and had to work with diligence and perseverance. His character was molded in the stern school of poverty. He was forced to be modest in his wants, active in his work, simple in his tastes. He had to put his faculties to work in order to obtain food and clothing. He had to practice economy. Fathers labor to place their children in a position of wealth rather than where they themselves began. This is a common mistake. Had children today to learn in the same school in which their fathers learned, they would become as useful as they. The fathers have altered the circumstances of their children. Poverty was the father's master. Abundance of means surrounds the son. All his wants are supplied. His father's character was molded under the severe discipline of frugality. Every trifling good was appreciated. His son's habits and character will be formed, not by the circumstances which once existed, but by the present situation, ease, and indulgence. That's the answer to that question. What should I be doing? Should I make my kids' life easier than mine? I'm not saying you should throw every single difficult obstacle in front of them, but should you remove all the obstacles? No, teach them what you did when you went through those things. Say, I trust in you. How about this one? Tell your kids the truth. Be careful, because sometimes we think we're telling our kids the truth. Do you know lying suggests you don't trust your child to handle the truth? If you have to lie to your kids, you're suggesting you don't think they can handle it, the truth. Lying also suggests they won't find out eventually anyway. Have you ever said something to your kid? I did this once in the group home. I was in a certain circumstance where I was working with kids who were sexual perpetrators. So that was one category of kids that I worked with. And we had to keep those kids' backstories confidential so that the other kids wouldn't make fun of them or tease them or bully them because of their circumstances. And so one kid came to me and was asking me about another kid, and I lied to him because I felt stuck. And then it dawned on me, oh man, that wasn't the only way I could have answered that question. And do you know what happened? The kid found out. Not what I was lying about him per se, but he realized that the excuse I made was not true. So I had to go back and tell him, I'm sorry, I did lie to you, and it wasn't good. But lying distorts the expectations of that your child has of what might happen and how to plan for it, thus giving them no way to truly succeed. Why do I have this picture here? A very personal reason. When I was growing up, later I found out the reason my mom never suggested that Santa even might exist was because she figured that if we thought Santa existed and then we found out he didn't, maybe we wouldn't believe that God existed too. And I'm always worried about saying that in a group. But isn't that true though? You know, but I will say my sister and I did pretend we believed in Santa because we would get gifts from my grandparents from Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and so we would pretend with them that we still believed in Santa because we didn't want to miss out on the extra gift. But I want you to look at these things that we tell kids, and I want to see if you can see why they might be a lie. Those kids don't hate you, they're just jealous of you. Why do we say this? to make them feel better. It might be true, but do we know? Do we know absolutely that they might be jealous? What would be better to tell a kid?
Ask them why they hate you. Focus on behavior.
Does everybody hate everybody that they act like they hate? I had a kid I was working with for 9 months in the group home, and he professed daily, not even just daily, multiple times a day, how much he hated me. Every single time I would be in his presence, "Oh, why are you here? I hate you. Why do I have to deal with you?" Every single day. Do you know 9 months later, actually 8 months later, I wound up telling the kids that I was going to be leaving because I was going to be working where I do now. At that point, that kid was my best friend. He knew I was going to be leaving in a month, and all of a sudden, he wanted to be with me every single time he saw me. And I was like, what? This kid acted like he hated me. What was he suggesting? Sometimes people don't trust that people could be kind to them. What do you think this kid experienced over and over and over again in his life? Being let down. What was he doing? Every single day he was testing me to see if I would still come after him. Was he jealous of me? No. Did he hate me? Probably not. He thought he hated me. He told me he hated me. But it's not just that. That's just one scenario. But what if the kids hate him? Is that the worst thing? What could we do about it? Some kids do hate other kids. Can we overcome that? Absolutely. We don't have to try to make people feel better just because something might be true. We can say, okay, what can we do about it? By the way, I don't know if you heard several years ago, one man, his son was being bullied at school, and what did he do? He decided to invite the kid over to spend time with him and his son. Turns out the kid didn't have a father himself or a family, and so he became his new adoptive son, and they got along great. Do you think that was a good way of handling the situation? Kid probably just hated anything that looked like it was better than what he had. So hating isn't the worst thing. We don't have to try to make kids feel better just because somebody might hate them. We can say, hey, what might be going on here? What could be happening? By the way, Jesus was hated, wasn't he? He was rejected and despised. There was no reason for anybody to hate him. Sometimes people hate things that, make them feel bad about themselves. We can't afford that. Most times parents can afford anything that's a priority. It might be better to say that's not a priority rather than we can't afford that. It might be that you can't afford it, but if you can't afford it and your kid watches you pay money for other things, what are they going to think? This isn't about how much money we have. And the reality is sometimes something is more important than that, and that's not an important thing to spend money on. How about this one? I promise to take you if you finish all your homework. That doesn't sound like a lie. Might your kid do something else, though, that keeps you from taking them? Yes. So, just because they finished their homework, what are they going to come back? Even though I had a bad attitude, you just said I had to finish my homework, right? So, you might want to say some other things besides that. Parenting by lying refers to the parenting practice. Here's another type of lying that we do. Parenting practice of deception to try to control children's behavioral and affective states. What is affective states? Their attitude. Results revealed that the adults who remembered being exposed to higher levels of parenting by lying in childhood showed higher levels of deception toward their parents and higher levels of psychosocial maladjustment. Did you hear that first part? Lying to their parents. So if the parents are parenting by lying, what happens? The kids wind up childing by lying, right? Yes, I did that. And you know they didn't brush their teeth or they didn't do what you asked them to do. But also, what does it train them to do later on? Maybe manipulate their own kids once they have kids. So here's another thing that I want to talk about. Dopamine is a very big thing that we love to get. Dopamine is a feel-good neurotransmitter chemical that your body makes to help you feel good. It's very important, but we also want to reduce or avoid artificial dopamine. There's many ways to get dopamine. One of the biggest ways, drugs is also another way, I didn't put that on here, but media. The more media you expose your child to, the more artificial dopamine your child will get. And by the way, each one of us has a very small dopamine receptor when we're little. And have you ever watched your very young baby playing outside or like rolling around outside, and they go and they'll pick up a piece of clover or something and they'll just stare at it. And they look like they're mesmerized by the most random things. Do you know why that is? Because their dopamine receptor is very small. That's a good thing. That means anything can be entertaining to them. Once you put things like media in front of a child, this is why one of the psychological associations for children says that you should never put your child in front of television before the age of 2. I think that's a low number, but before the age of 2, because what you're doing is you're making it so nothing satiates them afterwards. Because as you expose yourself to this kind of stimulation, what happens is that dopamine receptor gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and less excites you and entertains you. And so you want to keep that dopamine receptor as small as possible, otherwise you have to keep upping the ante all the time. I don't know if this is the case here, but in Las Vegas, what are they constantly doing? They're tearing down casinos and building bigger and bigger ones, and every single building has to have what on it? Flashing lights, right? Why is that? Because they want to stand out from the next one. What is that doing, though, to the people who are there? It's growing that dopamine receptor, so nothing excites you anymore. Most people, if they don't have a very large dopamine receptor, are going to go into that situation and go, whoa, it's too much, I can't handle it. But if you do that often enough, you'll be like, this is boring, I don't want to do this anymore. So we want to be careful because televisions, computers, gaming, music, and even fiction books can do this. Because fiction books are artificial reality. Another thing, too, we need to share with our kids is that feelings are not necessarily facts. Just because I feel something, it's important to challenge those feelings and the thoughts behind them. And that's another thing I'll go into in the next hour. We're going to get really practical in the next hour. One of the things, too, is purity in nature. And this is what helps that dopamine receptor get smaller and smaller. But simple life among pure nature and true religion is important. Nature is usually in a state of flux, which fosters problem-solving opportunities that build self-confidence. Another thing that will put you into that default mode network is actually being in nature. Hearing the natural sounds around you. By the way, it's also a calming factor too, because your heart naturally slows to the sounds of the things around it. So if you have somebody yelling at you, what happens to your heart? You start getting very anxious. But when you go out in nature and you have the sounds of nature around you, the slows down with it as well. Here's another one. This has been controversial in some of my presentations, napping. In Japan, they did this study. Children who nap 30 to 60 minutes midday at least 3 times a week are happier, have more self-control and grit, and showcase fewer behavioral problems, according to new research. These children also have higher IQs and excel academically. So not only do you get grit and resilience, but you get higher IQ. And this was so interesting because it talked about what age of the children. What do you think is a good age for kids to stop napping? Was that do I have to stop napping? It's actually, this study found that napping helps up to 12 years of age. So don't feel bad. I had a mom come up to me and she's like, I've been telling my husband they need to nap. And he's like, oh, I think they're old enough, they don't need to nap. Guess who was at the home all day with them? Dad's like, oh, they don't need to take their naps. She's like, I'm taking this back to my husband. So here's something about strengths-based parenting. The tendency for parents to see and encourage children to use their strengths relates to lower stress and higher satisfaction in adolescence even. And strengths can be considered moral virtues such as honesty, talent such as creative writing ability, or Big Five personality traits. And if you know anything about Big Five personality traits, these are the things that make kids the most successful in life. And they happen, if you think of the OCEAN acronym, openness to experiences. So if you have a very anxious child, you want to open them up to new experiences. Conscientiousness, and that doesn't mean just being super sensitive all the time. It can mean all kinds of things. But extroversion, that doesn't mean your introvert child, there's something wrong with them, but that they're willing to try things, to go outside. And agreeableness, that doesn't mean they agree with everything. I know some of these seem, but look up the Big Five personality traits. And I'll go on a little bit because I want to have more time for the next hour. Adolescents who see their parents as strength-based, that means the parents who are encouraging their strengths, report greater strengths use, especially when they have a growth mindset. So what is a growth mindset? When you have a challenge in your life, rather than go, oh no, how are we ever going to deal with this? A growth mindset parent says, hey, wow, we've got a challenge. What should we do? Let's figure this out. Let's sit down, have a powwow, and figure out how we want to handle this. In recent years, a series of studies have found promising indications that children and adolescents have greater well-being when they have parents who identify and encourage their strengths. So what does this look like? It's not, oh, you're so pretty. Please don't do that. Those aren't Big Five personality traits. How about, these are my favorite compliments when I hear parents give them. Things like, you know, honey, I really appreciated the way you helped your brother over there. I really appreciated that when your sister was, frustrating you, that you didn't give in to your anger and you sat there and you kept going with her. Because sometimes, your younger sibling is a little bit harder to deal with. But those kinds of things, those are strength-based parents and growth mindset parents. And one of my favorite quotes a strength-based parent might say is, it might be hard, but I trust you will find a way to meet this challenge. So, going back to the book that Angela Duckworth wrote, there is actually a grit scale. So there are some questions that you can ask, and you want to answer very much like me, mostly like me, somewhat like me, not much like me, or not like me at all. And this, you can do this for yourself as well. Do new ideas and projects sometimes distract me from previous ones? Or setbacks don't discourage me, I don't give up easily. I often use a goal, or often set a goal, but later choose to pursue a different one. I'm a hard worker. I have difficulty maintaining my focus on projects that take more than a few months to complete. I finish whatever I begin. My interests change from year to year. I am diligent, I never give up. I have been obsessed with a certain idea or project for a short time, but later lost interest. I have overcome setbacks to conquer an important challenge. And based on your answers to these, it shows your level of grit. There's another author I want to highlight. Her name is Celia Lashley, and she was a single mother in Australia, and she had a son. And she has since passed, but she used to work with at-risk kids in Australia in the group homes and also on probation. And one of the things that she really emphasizes in her book, He'll Be Okay, is allowing your child to experience consequences. So often we want to rescue our kids from the consequences of their behavior, but she says, if you do that with your kid growing up, what happens when you're no longer with them? They don't get to see what would have happened with their behavior. And so if you allow them to mess up, so to speak, early on, then they can start to track, okay, what do I need to do differently so I don't have to deal with the consequences of this? And so allow your kid to assume the consequences for their behavior and the things that they do and even the things that they fail at. Because you'll find out they won't wind up in juvenile hall later on or in jail or prison later on because they didn't know what could happen. Because most of the time when young adults wind up in jail or prison, it's because they're following somebody else who told them, but not necessarily realizing the consequences that are going to happen. They've actually done studies on teens, and teens actually think through the consequences more than they realize. Do you know what the biggest factor is, though, in them making stupid decisions? Peer pressure. So they often think through more. So you want to let them see what peer pressure does right away so that they don't do it later on and have to deal with even bigger consequences. Because once you're 18, you don't get to go to juvenile hall and have your record expunged. And the last one I want to share with you is religion. There's actually quite a bit of research that shows that religion helps with resiliency and grit. A study from Harvard Chan School of Public Health, people who attended weekly religious services and or practiced daily prayer or meditation, they were less likely to subsequently have depression symptoms, smoke, use illicit drugs, or have a sexually transmitted infection than people raised with less regular spiritual habits. And the author said, many children are raised religiously, and our study shows that this can powerfully affect their health behaviors, mental health, and overall happiness and well-being. And they followed 5,000 kids, and they followed them for 8 to 12 years in this study. 18% were more likely to be happy at 23 to 30 years of age if they were religious, and 29% more likely to volunteer, and 33% less likely to do drugs. And those who attended services, prayed, or meditated daily, they were 30% less likely to have sex at a young age and 40% less likely to get an STD. Those are powerful statistics. That's not even showing all of the other resiliency and grit related things too. But one of my favorite things about, and by the way, please look up the definition of religion. Do you know that every single person is religious? Do you know the only difference is who their God is? Did you know that? Some people think they're not religious, but who is their God? They're their God. They get to make up their symbols, their values, all of those things. They're based on what they want them to be. The only difference is what God they choose. But every single person is religious, whether they want to believe it or not. We all have a practice, a way that we do things. So here, to end, here's a resiliency test. How good is your child able to use creative problem solving in a difficulty or challenge? If you boil everything down to this, how able is your child to use creative problem solving in a difficulty or challenge? If you want to learn more, I'm going to give a shameless plug for our Brain People podcast. So anybody listen to it or watch it? Awesome. You don't have to be afraid. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple, Spotify, all those different things. And I just want to encourage you to listen to anything I might have omitted, or we have, I don't know, how many episodes do we have? Over 100 or something on there. So we have all kinds of things. If anybody wants to give me, if you do listen to it and you're like, you haven't talked about this yet, I'm here. You can take advantage of that and tell me what you want to hear more about, and we'll try to cover it in one of our upcoming episodes. So let's bow our heads before we take our break. Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you, Lord, that knowing you and studying your word helps us see that, you know, you've been very honest with us. You've told us that we're going to have trials and tribulations, but you've also told us that you have overcome. And if we stay close to you, if we live our lives according to your will, you say that you'll take care of all of those things for us. So Lord, help us to have resiliency and grit in this world. We want to honor and glorify you in everything that we do, and we want to show the world that there's a strength in knowing you. So we ask these things and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So will we take a break or something and then come back? If before you come back, if you want to get something hard to write on, or maybe there's hymnals, I guess you could use the back of a hymnal if you need to find a pen or something, because we're going to do something really practical for the next hour, okay? Or a pencil. I guess you have pencils in the back of the pews too. Look, you get everything when you come here. Do we want to do like 5 minutes or something to get a bathroom break? If you're outside, if you want to come on in. We're going to start. I know some people are outside still. If you're in the hallway, come in. No. Thank you. If my husband was here, that would be his job to go get everybody to come in. Does everybody have this sheet? Pull this one. If you didn't get the handouts, I should have told you before the break. If you didn't get the handouts, you should have 3 sheets of paper. I'll give you 1 more minute to go get your handouts. And you might have, I think I have somebody here who's, what is your name? Greg? Greg's going to give you handouts if you don't have them. Just bring them all in here. So this is the one, this mat most closely resembles the one on the screen. So we're going to use this first. And if you remember, I brought up Socratic questioning, and I referred to cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you want to have resilience and grit in life, one of the most important things you're going to have to do is learn to think right. Actually, maybe I usually do a whole presentation like this, but actually, let's see here. Ignore all my... Oh, I know, because I cut them out. That's okay. Have any of you ever read Mind, Character, and Personality, the 2nd volume? The 1st volume tends to focus more on the body. The 2nd volume tends to focus more on the mind. And so, if you've ever read Spirit of Prophecy, her writings, the volume 2 of Mind, Character, and Personality, there's a lot in there on the way that we're supposed to be thinking. And sometimes people say, how come I never hear this stuff? It's because we're not opening some of the best books that we have. And by the way, if you don't have any of those books, you can get them free on your iPhone or your Samsung Android or whatever kind of phone you use. There's apps that are totally free of all of her writings, so you don't even have to buy the book. Books are always nice, though. I love turning a page and being able to write on it. Anyway, so one of the things that I mentioned was cognitive behavioral therapy, and there is a principle in cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to break this down. There's 3 characteristics of cognitive behavioral therapy. The first 2, which are the bottom 2 circles you see on your screen, are the 2 reasons why every single person who ever comes to see me as their therapist comes to see me. And that is, I'm not feeling the way that I want to feel, and I'm feeling feelings I don't want to feel, and I'm not feeling the good feelings I want to feel. The other one is what happens when you're not feeling the way you want to feel. You're not doing the things that you should be doing, or you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. In other words, our behaviors and our feelings. Those are the two things that bring all of my clients to see me. They don't always realize that, but that's the foundation of why they're there. Here's the thing, though. Why do we feel the way we feel and do what we do? It's because of that top circle, our thoughts. Unfortunately, a lot of us have been trained to think a certain way, or we haven't been trained at all, so whatever is in our head, we don't know what to do with except just believe it. So, I want to help you today. We're going to get very practical. I want to help you to retrain the way that you think, especially if you're having a difficult time. And if you do this, you can also teach your kids to do this too. I call that twofer. You're learning, and then you're sharing it with somebody else. By the way, if you share it with somebody else, don't tell them, you think really poorly. You need to hear what I have to say. Do it this way. Say, I'm learning how to think better, and the best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else, right? That's the ultimate form of learning, is when you can teach it to somebody else. So, would you be willing to listen to me try to teach what I've learned, and tell me if I'm doing anything that you don't understand, and that way you might have to go back to the drawing board to figure out what you didn't remember, right? And be able to teach it effectively too. And the more you're able to teach it effectively, the more it proves you know it. So this sheet right here is how we change those thoughts. If the thoughts are wrong at the top, it's going to affect how we feel and how we act. And a lot of people feel like they're out of control. Why do I feel so crazy, or why do I feel so out of control? It's probably what you're telling yourself in your thoughts. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to break each one of these down. So if you notice, what does the top have across it? You do not have to know all 26 letters of the alphabet to do this. What a relief. No, I'm just kidding. We all know our alphabet. But we're going to take the first 5 letters, and we're going to use them to do this. So what does the A stand for? Activating event. Do you know we have activating events all day, every day that happen? In other words, triggers, stressors, those kinds of things. They can be good, but most of the time the reason they're affecting us so much is because we would categorize them maybe as bad or difficult. So every single time we have these triggers or activating events, I want you to break them down into 4 different categories, and then decide which category it is that you're dealing with. So the first 2 categories, or the first category, is external. So when you're looking at your activating events, you might want to ask yourself, okay, what outside of me is affecting me? We have 2 things that are outside of us that are affecting us. The first one is people. Anybody think of somebody right off the bat when you think of somebody that's a stressor or a trigger for you? You don't have to say it out loud. If you want to, you're welcome to. Don't out anybody, though, in front of everybody. Sometimes it's somebody you work with at work, but here's the thing. I don't want you to focus just on the person. I want you to get detailed. I want you to think, what is it that they say or do that actually triggers you? Most of the time, it's not the whole of somebody, it's something that they say or do. Also, it could be a circumstance. Sometimes the circumstances could be the weather. Does everybody like the same weather? No. Some people love it when it's hot, some people love it when it's cold, some people love it somewhere in between. So maybe the weather affects you. Maybe traffic, that could be a circumstance. Maybe, dare I say, politics affects somebody in here? That could be your trigger. So we have all kinds of things that are outside of us, including the things people say or do, or the things outside of us that might be affecting us. So if you have one of those things, keep that in mind. But the other thing that some of us are dealing with are actually internal. And many people that I work with have depression or anxiety or struggling with depression or anxiety. Why do I say that? Because those are actually umbrella terms. Did you know there's no such thing as depression as a diagnosis or anxiety as a diagnosis? Those are merely categories, and underneath those categories are a dozen or so diagnoses that you could get that would be anxiety disorders or depression disorders. So when somebody says, oh, I have depression, they're not specifically telling you what they have. They could have bipolar 1, they could have bipolar 2, they could have dysthymia, they could have major depressive disorder, whatever the case may be. All they're doing is giving you a general term. If they have anxiety, they could have generalized anxiety disorder, they could have PTSD, they could have OCD, they could have agoraphobia. All of those things and many more, that's all that they're saying. But within those, when you have depression, what kinds of thoughts do you think people have often? That come up over and over and over. I call it like your internal playlist. You know how if you program all your songs in, you kind of know what the next one is going to be when it pops up? Or if you still have cassettes or CDs? Don't you know what the next song is? If you listen to it enough, you know the next song before the previous one even stops. And so, what I want you to consider is if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or any kind of diagnoses, what kinds of thoughts and feelings are going to be rolling around in your head even if nothing else is causing them? Things like, I'm so stupid, I can't do anything right, life sucks, those kinds of things, right? Nothing may have happened. You may have come in here today and had a wonderful day going, but all of a sudden that thought just popped in there without anything triggering it. Do you know that that's your trigger then? That thought popping in. That's the trigger. And the same with our feelings. Sometimes we wake up and we just feel anxious and we don't remember a bad dream. We don't remember anything that's going to be happening today that should be causing that anxiety, but we just feel it sort of like overtake us. And we don't know where it came from. That can also be your activating event. So keep that in mind, because the next thing that we're going to look at is, what does the B stand for? I want you to be involved. Beliefs. Do you know when those activating events happen? Do you know what they're actually triggering? A belief. Do you know we all operate off of certain beliefs? I'll give you a random one. How about the belief that if somebody gives me a gift, that would be the activating event? My belief is I should say thank you. Did you know that's a belief? Does everybody believe you should say thank you? No, not everybody does. Have you ever given somebody a gift and they didn't say thank you? They don't believe they have to. Sometimes people don't say thank you. None of my kids in the group, well, not all of them. Some of them said thank you. But not everybody learns to say thank you. Not everybody believes it's even necessary. But if you have an activating event, it is going to trigger a belief. So I want you to look at this sheet right here. And this is a list of all kinds of beliefs average, normal people have. This sheet right here. And I want you to I'm just going to give you a minute or two. I'd like you to go through this sheet, both sides. It's got two sides. And I want you to go through this sheet, and I want you to check off any belief on here that you think that you identify with having. Pop up in your mind regularly, semi-regularly, every single moment of every day. Anything that you recognize in here. And typically, you're going to know this is your belief because it causes you some distress. And don't worry, you're not going to have to share it with anybody. So be honest with yourself. And if somebody does want to be brave, you could pick one out on here and we can use it as an example for the rest of the sheet. And don't feel bad, because what's the third word of the title of this sheet that you're looking at? What's the third word in the title? Huh? Oh, no, the third word of the title of this sheet, common. So what does that mean? You're not the only one. And you'll take one of those beliefs and you'll write it under the B here. And by the way, if your belief isn't on here, that's okay too. If you have some awareness of a belief that you might have that doesn't show up on this list or this table of common core beliefs on either side, then you can use that belief. A belief that's not on here that is common for some people is, I can't do life without drugs. That's a belief that some people have. I need something to take the edge off. I can't do it without it. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, you name it, even cigarettes. I can't do life without this. Other people may, but I can't. Does everybody have at least one that they could work on? Would anyone like to offer or volunteer a belief off of this list for us to work on? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be yours, it could be a friend's. Just point to the person next to you and say, they wanted me to offer this one. Okay, so I'm going to write that one down, even, because I might forget it with all the other stuff I have to remember. Even my best efforts aren't good enough? Okay, that's a good one to work with. Okay, so we're going to go backwards just for a second. And remember, when we have a belief, there's usually something that activates that belief. So can you think of anything that might activate this belief? I'm just going to use this one as an example as we go through this sheet, but you can also do your own as we go through. What might be something that happens, whether it's a person saying something or doing something? It could be circumstances. It could be just your own internal thoughts about certain things or feelings. What could activate that kind of belief? Even my best efforts aren't good enough. Criticism. Yes, somebody could be criticizing you. You're not doing enough. See, even my best efforts aren't good enough. Or you didn't do well enough on that test. Go ahead.
You could start trying to do something, and you could associate that thought with it.
Okay. Yeah, even before something bad happens, just because I'm starting it, I go, see, my best efforts aren't good enough. I'm already sabotaging it before it happens. That's also, we'll look at that a little bit later too. I like that example. Anybody else? Failure. Yeah, I failed at something. I work at Google and they gave me a project and it didn't go well. I failed. By the way, has anybody in here not ever failed at anything? Okay, just want to make sure. You're raising your Okay, anything else that might cause that? What if you just have the internal dialogue that I suck, I can't do anything right? That might prompt even the belief that even my best efforts aren't good enough. Okay, when we have that belief, in other words, our thoughts, self-talk, interpretation, perspective, That belief is a response to the activating event. Here's the thing, not everybody responds to their activating event the same way, with the same belief. Did you know that? Did you know when somebody tries something for the first time, not everybody says, see, even my best efforts aren't good enough? What might somebody else say?
I'll try it again.
Okay, I'll try it again. Or, hey, what do I got to lose?
It's an experiment.
This is an experiment. Yeah. Do you know not everybody talks to themselves the same way when they start a project or start something? What was another example? Oh, criticism. Do you know not everybody says even my best efforts aren't good enough when they're criticized? What do some people do when they're criticized?
They're wrong.
Yeah, they're wrong. They don't know me, right? Or some people drink it in and they go, oh, tell me more, because that just drives me to do even better, right? Not everybody responds the same way. Do you know what that means? What we believe about those activating events is actually a choice, whether we know it or not. But do you know what most of us believe? That that's not even a choice. We believe that every thought that comes into our head when something happens, that activating event, it must be true because I'm thinking it. That's what we do. Most of us do. What we don't realize is we've actually been training ourselves to do that route for so long. So then, what happens after that? We have to deal with certain, what does the C stand for? Consequences. So, I want you to tell me, how does somebody feel when they believe even my best efforts aren't good enough? If you have that belief, even my best efforts aren't good enough, by the way, do you know that the consequences are not the consequences of the activating event? I don't have to feel a certain way just because somebody criticizes me. I don't have to act a certain way just because somebody criticizes me. Why am I feeling and acting this way?
Belief.
Because of what I'm telling myself. This is powerful. This means I actually have the key that unlocks this situation. It's not I have to wait for everybody else to change. You know what we call this? When we're doing that from A to C, we call it A to C thinking. Do you know what A to C thinking makes you? Makes you a victim. If you realize it's actually the B, bless you, if you realize it's actually your belief about the activating event, then you are no longer a victim. Why?
Because you can challenge the belief.
Yes, I don't have to wait for that person to stop criticizing me. I don't have to wait for the challenges to stop coming. I don't have to wait for all of these activating events to stop happening. All I have to do is change the way I think, and I'm the one who decides that. Most of us are victims not because of what other people do or say or circumstances in our lives. It's because of what we tell ourselves in the midst of those situations. Even with our depression and anxiety. If I'm depressed, I wake up depressed, nothing happened, but I wake up depressed. Do you know if I tell myself, see, here we go again, I'm depressed again, this is never going to change. What did I just do?
Expressed a belief.
I self-sabotaged myself. Do you know that here, this is so powerful that it's even biological? Do you know every negative thought that you have actually has a biological effect on your body? Do you know what that biological effect is? It's called cortisol. Do you know what cortisol does to the body? The precursor of all disease. What is the precursor of all disease? Here's a hint. What does itis mean in every single clinical diagnosis? Inflammation. Yes. Cortisol causes inflammation in the body, so it doesn't just affect you up here, it actually starts to break you down biologically. Do you know what healthy thinking does? The opposite. It takes away inflammation. Do you know people are often dying and sick from no biological origin. This is the origin. Do you know who that sounds like? Do you know who wrote about this in the 1800s? Do you think she knew something? Maybe she didn't even know what she was talking about, but the Holy Spirit was guiding her to write it down. I wish so many more people understood like how much information we have as a church that so many people don't even realize. It's so cool. It's so fun as a therapist to read her stuff too. But if we have this belief, even my best efforts aren't good enough, what kinds of emotions are we going to experience? This is where we get to pull out our emotional vocabulary. By the way, if you want, I didn't give you a handout for this, but you can just literally go online and type up like pleasant emotion list or feelings list or something like that, and you can get a whole beautiful breakdown of all kinds of emotions. If you don't understand what some of them are, look them up. And start expanding your emotional vocabulary. There's a difference between anger and righteous indignation. What's the difference? They're both anger. One's a lot longer to say. Yeah. But what's the difference between anger and righteous indignation? Anger is just general. Righteous I can't even say it. Righteous indignation says what about the anger? It's for a righteous cause. Did you know that? You can actually describe your anger. I have a righteous cause. What would be a righteous cause to be angry?
Exploiting the poor.
Taking advantage of somebody. Yeah. Treating somebody other than what God says that we should do. We should be angry about that. That doesn't mean you go punching walls and terrorizing people. What does righteous indignation do, though, that maybe anger wouldn't necessarily consider?
Fight for the right thing.
Yeah, use it for justice. Use it to talk to people and encourage them to act differently. Right? Anger doesn't mean you have to punch things. So, what kinds of emotions might we experience if we believe even my best isn't good enough? Despair, yeah. Frustration, yeah. Gloom. Hopelessness. Do you know that hopelessness is actually a single symptom that you can relate to depression? If somebody has hopelessness, you don't have to ask them all the other questions. They're depressed. Any other emotions you might experience if you believe even my best isn't good enough?
Fatigue.
Yeah, we can be emotionally tired even if we're not physically tired, but it can lead to physical exhaustion too. Anything else?
Anger.
Yeah.
Frustration.
We got frustration, yeah.
Bewilderment.
We got the emotional dictionary over here. He must think we need help. Who else wants to help us besides Greg? I know you've got some ideas. Some people are just afraid to speak up.
I'm trying to be an icebreaker.
You're trying to be an icebreaker. Mm-hmm. Well, we have despair, frustration, gloom, hopeless, fatigue, anger, bewilderment. How does that feel? Do we want to stay here? No, that sounds awful. But there's another consequence that comes with believing even my best efforts aren't good enough. Escapism. You're already getting to the behaviors. Yes, escapism. What does that look like? Sometimes we have behaviors and we like to generalize them, but there's some specific things that we do. What does escapism look like? Give me some specifics.
Eat a gallon of ice cream.
Eat my feelings away. Eat junk.
Read a fantasy novel.
Read something bad. Silence, okay. Avoidance. Yes.
Pouring your energy into something else.
Okay. I don't write that fast. Distraction. Okay. Anything else we do? Do you know one of the big things we do? We start comparing ourselves to others. I'm going to name some of my favorite all-encompassing ones that almost every single person does these when we have unhealthy beliefs. So we have comparing. Another one is what I like to call hyper-focusing, or some people call it hyperfixation. What are we hyper-focusing on and hyper-fixating on? Work. But remember, what's my belief? Even my best efforts aren't good enough. So we start going over the list of things that we've done that weren't good enough. Right? So we hyper-focus or hyper-fixate on all of the failures that we've had throughout our experience or our existence, right? What are we not doing then? If you're hyper-focusing on one thing, what are you not able to focus on? Successes in my life? Do you see how evil this behavior is? If I'm hyper-focusing or hyper-fixating, I'm not doing anything else. Because you can't do two things at once. Sorry, ladies, but when we say that, we're just going back and forth between things. That's why you've burnt things in the past while you're trying to do something else. I know, because I've done it myself. Right? Now, on the list up there on the screen, you can see we also ruminate. I talked about sheep earlier. What do sheep do that's called ruminating? Describe that for me. Regurgitate. Now, we don't do this as humans, hopefully, but how do we ruminate instead? We don't do it with our food. Our thoughts. We just keep going over the last time my effort wasn't good enough. It's not necessarily all the efforts, but we're just focusing and going over and 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 over. And I know this, not because I'm in your head, but my clients tell me this, and I'm human too. It doesn't mean I'm not tempted to do these things. We all do this. We ruminate on that situation and we think about it from this angle and that angle, and why didn't I do this, and why didn't I do that, and why did they do this, and why did they do that, right? Also, the other thing that we do is we beat ourselves up. In other words, we negative self-talk. By the way, rumination, some people call it spiraling. You just go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But negative self-talk is when we start beating ourselves up. We become that ugly, angry dictator in our head. Can't do anything right. What's wrong with you? See, you try and nothing ever works. Are you serious? You call yourself a whatever you do for a living? And we just beat and beat and beat and beat. It's like we like it or something. By the way, you can get addicted to these things. Anything? Oh, do you want to know what it's called when it comes out of your mouth? When you start talking about it all the time? Have you ever been around somebody and they just cannot get off of something that happened and you're like, still, we're talking about this? It's called perseveration. Sometimes we do it ourselves. Something happens and we can't stop thinking about it, and so we just start talking about it. The problem with that is two-sided. One, people don't listen to us anymore, which makes us want to talk about it even more because we're not getting the satisfaction of it. Or somebody's entirely empathetic and we go, oh, see, that feels so good. And so we keep sharing the story, hoping that the next person will be as empathetic too. But all venting does, or all ruminating and perseverating does, is it just feeds it. It feeds it. It's kind of like, when you stare at the wall and your mom says, stop staring at the wall, your eyes are going to stay stuck, and you're like, but it feels so good. Right? You have to quickly turn your glance so you stop doing it. Lack of creative problem solving. We start to give up very easily. We don't even try at things when we believe that even my best efforts aren't good enough. We'll stop here because I think we have a good list here going on. But if you don't like this, what's the problem? What we feel and do is hurting us, it tells us our beliefs are faulty and distorted. So if you want to know if you have a healthy belief or not at this point, say it's not on the list of common core beliefs. By the way, those are all unhealthy. If you have a question about any of them, you can ask me, because I know some of them aren't entirely obvious why they're unhealthy, but if you have a question, you can come and ask me. But if our beliefs are off, we know this because our behaviors and our emotions are off. And right now we have escapism, eating junk, reading something that's not good for us, silence, avoidance, procrastination. I can't read my own writing. I have a very weak pencil here. Oh, pouring ourselves into something, distraction, and comparing, and then some of the ones I listed even before. Not to mention despair, frustration, gloom, hopeless, fatigue, anger, bewilderment. How many of you want to stay here? We could just stop here and here. Does that sound good? No. No, hopefully not. You're not here just to see the problem. What are you here for? The solution. A through C, if you don't do anything past this point, what are you going to do? Just keep cycling through all of that over and over and over again. And that's where some of us are. It does not feel good. Why am I here? Well, we have to go to the D. What does the D stand for? Dispute. I love this one. So we're going to look at the last page, the last handout that you've been given, and I want you to look at the 10 ways to untwist your thinking. Okay? There's two sides of it, but I want you to look at the side that says 10 ways to untwist your thinking. Can I have a volunteer read number 1 for me, please? Oh, no, the other side. The other side. 10 ways to untwist your thinking. Okay, what was the first thing it said we needed to do?
Write it down.
Did you write? Huh? Did everybody write down their belief so far on their ABCD sheet? Okay, so the first thing is to write down your thought. What is the second thing it says to do?
Examine the evidence.
Oh, no. The second thing within that first paragraph. It's also the title of it. Identify the distortion. Okay, this is where you turn your page over. What is this? It says checklist of cognitive distortions. So I want you to look at your belief, and I want you to go back and forth looking at your belief and looking at this sheet. Number 1, all or nothing thinking. This is when you look at things as in absolute black and white categories. So what does this mean? I have extreme thinking either this way or extreme thinking either this way. What's in between black and white? Gray. I'm not looking at the gray. I'm only looking at this extreme or that extreme. Does your belief have all or nothing thinking in it? Even my best efforts aren't good enough. How about that one? Is that all or nothing thinking? Why?
You're not thinking about the other things.
You're only thinking about one extreme, right? Yeah. So what do we know so far about our belief? It's distorted. It's got distortions in it. How about number 2, overgeneralization? You view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. Does this belief, even my best efforts aren't good enough, is that an overgeneralization? By the way, if you want to know if you overgeneralize, look out for always, every time, or never in what you're saying. Husbands, I just got you off the hook. If she says, you never take out the trash, you can say, honey, that's a cognitive distortion. That's overgeneralizing. I just tugged on some couples there. Okay, is there any overgeneralization in this one? By the way, it doesn't have to have always, never, or every time in it, but it can allude to it. Is there any always, every time, or never kind of thinking in this one? Yeah, this is an overgeneralization. All of my best efforts aren't good enough. Okay, number 3, mental filter. You dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives. Is there any of this? And even my best efforts aren't good enough. Yes, so we're 3 for 3 right now. Good job. No, that's not a good job. That's not wrong grading. Number 4, I like this one because if you're not just good at mental filtering, but you're even good at disqualifying the positive, you insist your accomplishments or positive qualities don't count. That's not always the situation with disqualifying the positive, but say for instance somebody gives you a compliment and you go, oh, maybe they complimented your nose and you're like, yeah, it looks like my mom's nose. That person just gave you a compliment, and what are you doing? You're insulting your mom too, yes, but you're disqualifying a positive. What should we say when somebody gives us a compliment? Thank you. You don't have to disqualify it, just accept it and say thank you. We do this sometimes. Oh, I love your outfit. Oh, this whole thing, I found it in the hamper. I didn't have anything else to wear. I was going to give it to Goodwill. And the other person leaves going, wow, I must have really bad taste because I thought it was nice. Number 5. Oh, by the way, is there any disqualifying the positives and even my best efforts aren't good enough? Yes. Number 5, jumping to conclusions. This has 2 parts. Mind reading. You assume you know what people are thinking without any evidence, or fortune telling. Some people call this catastrophizing. You arbitrarily think you know what will happen even without any evidence. Is there any mind reading or fortune telling or catastrophizing in this? It could be. Yes. It could be. Yeah. 5 for 5. Ouch. Should we stop now? How about magnification or minimization? You make a bigger deal out of it or a lesser deal out of it? Absolutely. Okay. How about number 7? This is one of my favorites because pretty much we're doing this every single time we have an irrational belief. Emotional reasoning. You reason from how you feel instead of the facts. So if I feel angry, that person must have done something to make me angry. If I feel happy, I must be in a good relationship. If I feel frustrated, this must be too hard for me. Do you get what I'm talking about? Is there any emotional reasoning in this? It doesn't say what the person is feeling in this belief, but if you added, this is too hard, I can't do it, or I'm so frustrated, that could allude to emotional reasoning. Number 8, should statements. You criticize yourself or other people with shoulds or shouldn'ts, musts, oughts, have tos, or similar offenders. It doesn't have a should, must, or ought to. You could always make it that way and include that, but we'll give ourselves a pass on that one. It's not a very obvious should statement. It might be assuming my best effort should always be good enough. Number 9, though, labeling. This is when you tend to label yourself by one quality versus the whole of you. I like to use the analogy, when you see a can of something that has as the first ingredient tomatoes, and maybe the second ingredient some water, and then maybe some oil, maybe some onion, garlic, pepper, salt, oregano. What am I talking about? Tomato sauce. Tomato sauce? But what if I call it onion sauce? It's got onions in it, doesn't it? That's labeling. I'm labeling myself onion sauce, even though I got tomatoes in me and there's a lot more tomatoes than just the onions, right? But we do this to other people sometimes. We don't know them. Oh, that jerk. The only thing we know of them is that maybe they cut in front of us on the road. And we call him a jerk. I don't know this person well enough to call him that. Do I know that that is the full and whole story of this person? No. I might think I do. But does that mean I do? That's labeling. But we do it to ourselves sometimes too. We make a mistake and we go, I'm so stupid. By the way, do you know what that makes you? Human. If you want to call yourself human, oh, I just proved I'm human today. Yay. But labeling, is there any labeling in this? Now, if you ended it with I'm a failure, it would be labeling. But it's not just the way that it is. Number 10, personalization and blame. You blame yourself for something you weren't entirely responsible for, or you blame other people and overlook ways that your own attitudes and behavior might contribute to a problem. Is there any personalization or blame here? There might be a little bit alluded to. It's not a specific, blame of others or personalization. By the way, sometimes people personalize when they've experienced abuse. I just have to say this as a caveat. Sometimes I'll hear people say, well, if I got out of it, it wouldn't have happened. Or if I wasn't there, it wouldn't have happened. What are they suggesting?
It's their fault.
That it's my fault the abuse happened. What if I was 5 years old? I'm not taking into consideration the context. I'm not taking into consideration how much agency do I have at 5 years old? Not much. But we personalize those things to try to make some sense out of it. Sometimes we do it to protect our relationship with the other person too. I don't want to blame them and make them a bad person, then I can't rely on them, so I'll be the bad person. So I can continue to have that relationship with them, right? Is there any personalization or blame? Maybe a little bit here. Okay, so we're going to go back to the other side, and I have 3 minutes left. Can I go a little bit over?
That's fine.
Okay, cool. So number 2, so you don't have, oh, by the way, before we do that, I'm already trying to go faster, but what do we know about our beliefs so far? The one that we're looking at?
Distorted.
It's distorted. How many cognitive distortions does it have?
It's really distorted.
It's really distorted. Okay, I don't want anybody to beat themselves up and start, doing all the cognitive distortions because of that. What I want you to recognize is, oh, I've been believing this for a long time and I never looked at it accurately before. That's what I want you to do with this. How many of us know what to do until we know what to do?
Right.
We don't. You're all starting from the place of, I'm learning, okay? When you see a baby take their first step, what does everybody do when that baby subsequently falls after their first step? Oh my goodness, you did a great job! Nobody goes, you stupid idiot, what kind of walker are you? Seriously, that's all you're gonna give me? We don't do that. Why do we do that to ourselves when we're doing something for the first time and we're learning? We're so mean to ourselves when we're trying something. I still kick myself. I had an opportunity to learn how to play golf, and all these people around me were hitting the ball, and they played golf so well, and I didn't do it because I didn't want to look stupid. And I'm like, why didn't I just do it? There was like a professional trying to teach me. I had this cool opportunity to have somebody tell me what to do and how to do it, and I didn't want to do it because the people I was with, they played golf all the time. I was comparing myself to what they did all the time when I never did it. I should have just done it. Next time I get a chance, I'll do it. Okay, number 2 on 10 ways to untwist your thinking. Examine the evidence. Who wants to read that one? You got to go faster. I'm going to be here all night. Do you want me here all night?
Instead of assuming that your negative thought is true, examine the actual evidence for it. For example, if you feel that you never do anything right
This one was written specifically for this belief, wasn't it? That doesn't always happen. That was really awesome. Okay, so I want to go through this for a second. The question up here, if you look at the screen, sorry, I'm looking at the back screen, but if you look at this, the question is it true? And how do we know something is true? It's on there. Evidence. If you go in a courtroom, how's the judge or the jury going to make their decision? Evidence. Okay, now here's the thing. You never go into a courtroom. Anybody been a juror before or work in courtrooms? Okay. Juror or work in courtroom? Juror, okay. I've been a juror twice. I almost got to do it a third time. I love being a juror. Except they pay you like 30 cents a day to do it. So that it really puts a hamper in my job. But if you go into a courtroom and you're looking for evidence, do you ever see a judge go, you know what? I'm just going to have you tell me your side of the story. And then the lawyer, maybe representing this side, says, Your Honor, this is the evidence that my client is not guilty. And do you ever see the judge go, actually, that sounds pretty good. I'm just going to make my decision now. I don't need to hear the other side. But do you know this is what we do so often in our own minds? We go, I think I know it, so I'm just going to make a decision based on it, and that's it. Because look at all the times I've failed, or I wasn't good enough. Do you know the Bible says that we're supposed to be salt of the earth? Do you know what that word actually means? It's such a simple thing. Prudence. Do you know what prudence means? Balanced. Do prudent people listen to gossip and just run with it and go and tell everybody else? No. They're not going to do anything with that because they've only heard one side of the story. Wouldn't it be lovely if the entire world was salt? Man, I'd love to live in that world. I'm going to one day, but it's not this one. If we were all prudent people and we were willing to listen to not just this side, but also this side, do you know that is the one quality that's going to help you have better thinking? I can't just listen to all of the evidences that my efforts aren't good enough. I also have to listen to the efforts or the evidence that my efforts have been good enough. Here's the other thing, though. What does a judge do when they don't have enough evidence? They dismiss the case. Do you know the human brain doesn't like to do that? We don't want to go, you know what, I don't have enough evidence right now. I'm going to put this to the side. I'm going to cold case this one. I'll come back when I have more evidence. No, we love to just make up decision right then and there and go with it and run with it and to pattern our whole lives after it. But what would happen if we were not just willing to listen to this side, but this side, and then make sure I do have enough evidence to even have a belief for this? Wow, that might take a little patience and some time, though. Could we all do that? I'd like to. I'd like to consider doing that. We have to start with our own thoughts, though. So that's what it means to examine the evidence. How about number 3? Who wants to read that one?
Instead of putting yourself down in a harsh, condemning way, talk to yourself in the same compassionate way you would talk to a friend with a similar problem.
If your friend came to you and said, even my best efforts aren't good enough, would you say, yeah, you're right. You suck. Nothing you do is ever good enough. Does anybody do that to anybody else? Hope not. Why is it okay to do it to ourselves then? Another way you can look at that too is if your 5-year-old self came to you and said, even my best efforts aren't good enough, what would you tell your 5-year-old self? Yeah. That's what we mean by the double standard. Why am I telling myself this if I wouldn't tell anybody else that? Number 4. Who wants to read?
I think I can talk again. Okay, so the validity of your negative thought. For example, if during the episode of panic you become terrified that you're about to die of a heart attack, you could jog or run up and down several flights of stairs. This will prove that your heart is healthy and strong.
Somebody with panic attacks is like, nope, not going to do it. But you know you won't have a heart attack if you do this, if you're just having a panic attack. But how would we experiment with even my best efforts aren't good enough?
You can say to yourself, whoa, wait and see. That's one.
Okay.
It's a challenge. You could also go to a friend and talk to them about it and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm telling myself. What do you think?
Do you know what most of us do is we believe something and so we don't even try.
Right.
By the way, the best way to get rid of your anxiety is to expose yourself to the thing that you're afraid of. So if you're afraid to succeed, what should you be doing? Trying really hard to succeed, right? And then just see what happens. Okay, number 5, Thinking in Shades of Gray. Who wants to read this one? And by the way, Greg is reading because nobody else is, so don't make him keep reading all the time or sing. Okay, go ahead.
Thinking in Shades of Gray. Although this method might sound dry, the effects can be illuminating. Instead of thinking about your problems in all or nothing extremes, evaluate things on a range of 10 to 100.
0 to 100.
0 to 10.
What if I only get a 9?
When things don't work out as well as you hope, think about the experience as a partial success rather than a complete failure. See what you can learn from the situation.
Oh. So, even my best efforts aren't good enough. What are we looking at here? It's either 0 or 100, right? We know this because, by the way, is anybody paying attention? Did you notice what we're doing up to this point on this page?
We're dismantling the false beliefs.
We're challenging the cognitive distortions. All of the cognitive distortions, we're challenging them with the 10 ways to untwist your thinking. Because it just said all or nothing thinking there. So, even my best efforts aren't good enough. What am I assuming about all of my best efforts here?
They're a 0.
0. Is it likely that all of my best efforts keep winding up being zeros?
No.
What if they're a 45?
That's pretty good.
Is that better than 0? By the way, even our grading system, no offense teachers, but if you fail on a test, what is better, a 0 or a 50?
Amen.
It's the same grade, but on a test, what do you assume with a test? When you take all of the class, is the test everything? In most cases, I don't know who might be a teacher that grades entirely their whole class on one test.
Ouch.
If you get a 50 on your test and you get 100s on everything else, did that 50 help a lot more than a 0? Okay, good. I didn't totally ruin that one. Okay, so just because it's a failing grade on that one, it still helps the rest of your grade rather than a 0, right? And that's what we need to do in our heads too. If we just rate everything on pass or fail, then what happens? We get very discouraged easily and we don't want to do it anymore. Number 6, the survey method.
Ask people questions to find out if your thoughts and attitudes are realistic. For example, if you believe that public speaking anxiety is abnormal and shameful, ask several friends if they ever felt nervous before they gave a talk.
Okay, so how would we do that with even my best efforts aren't good enough?
Bring the effort to your friend and talk it over of here's what I tried to do. And I'm telling myself that it's not good enough. What do you think?
That is a very good one to experiment with, but it's something a little bit different here. What is actually the question that we're to ask our friends?
Do you also feel like that all the time?
Do you ever feel like your best efforts aren't good enough? What happens when you talk to your friends and you say, sometimes I feel like my best efforts aren't good enough? Do you ever feel like that? What happens? You're not the only one. And that part starts to create oh, why do we all feel this way? Or why do we all think this way? Maybe that's not correct, but at least I'm not the only one doing it. Now I can start to relate. This is one of my favorite things about running a group every day, is that people come in and they think they're the craziest, most depressed, most anxious person they've ever met. And then they come into a room of other people who are going through that. And they go, oh, at least I'm not crazy and anxious and depressed all by myself. But then what starts happening? Because they can let go of the fear of being the only one, now what can they do? Start to heal that belief or those ideas in their head that are causing them so much distress. Sometimes it's not just the belief, it's the fear of it. Yes?
I mean, could that not also be validating too?
Like irrational thought.
Like, oh, every mom also seems to think this way, and so it's like this is just normal, and so it's okay that I think this way. You know what I mean? Like, if you're able to justify the belief.
I could see how somebody could do that with it. That's why it's a good thing there's 10 different questions we have to ask ourselves. But the other thing, though, is when I take myself out of the situation and I'm then looking at it from somebody else's perspective, if I know my friend doesn't think she's doing well enough, but here I've been sitting here going, wow, I thought she was the perfect mom, or I thought she did this so well, what starts happening? I might think to myself, well, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought, because maybe I'm doing things that other people think I'm a great mom at too. So I understand what you're saying, but if that's the only thing going on, then you still have to ask the other 9 questions. Yeah. But yeah, we don't want to validate bad thinking too, because everybody else feels the same way. Okay, number 7, define terms.
When you label yourself inferior or a fool or a loser, ask what is the definition of a fool. You will feel better when you see there is no such thing as a fool or a loser.
Okay, so those aren't the best examples. So I'm going to give another example. If I think I'm ugly, how does everybody define the term ugly? Do we all have the same definition for ugly? What are some definitions of ugly, or beautiful for that matter? Have you ever met somebody that didn't come across as the most attractive person, but you got to know them and you're like, wow, this person's pretty cool. Like, I find myself drawn to them all the time. Or maybe you've found somebody very attractive, and then they did something that you're like, ugly, right? So how do you define that then? How do you define that? Because certain things can be attractive to one person and not necessarily attractive to another. Isn't that kind of nice that we live in a world where there's varying views of things? But here, what if we do that with even my best efforts aren't good enough? Let's define good enough. How do you define good enough? I can say that to myself, I'm not good enough, my efforts aren't good enough, all day long, but if I never sit down and ask myself, well, what is good enough? Am I rating myself accurately? I never defined the terms. So how do I know if they're not good enough if I don't even know what the terms are? That's like me telling you you're not a good enough employee. And you're like, I never got a description of my job. You never even told me what I was supposed to be doing. How can I not be good enough at something I don't even know what to do? Right? Okay, number 8, the semantic method. Who wants to read that one?
Simply substitute language that is less colorful and emotionally loaded. This method is helpful for should statements. Instead of telling yourself, I shouldn't have made that mistake, you can say, it would be better if I hadn't made that mistake.
Okay, so how do we change the semantics of even my best efforts aren't good enough so where it's not so harsh?
I can try hard things.
Okay.
Like that didn't work out, but I can change the way I'm trying to do that and try again.
Okay. Yeah.
This is a learning opportunity.
Yeah, this is a learning opportunity. At least I didn't fail at it. Good job, Amanda. Or, I don't know, according to who, if they liked it even or not. I felt pretty decent about what I did. I don't know what everybody else thinks about it, but I got it done. By the way, can you do everything at 100% capacity? So if you feed your kids every single day and you get all the major food groups in there, even though you didn't make everything from scratch every meal all the time, could that potentially be good enough? I'm not sure. So hey, I fed my kids today. Good job. It wasn't my best effort, but I did it. I fed my kids today. They're still healthy, you know. How about number 9? I haven't run out of all of you. There's more than 10 people in this room.
Which one are we at?
Number 9.
All right, reattribution. Instead of automatically assuming that you are bad and blaming yourself entirely for the problem, think about the many factors that may have contributed to it. Focus on solving the problem instead of using up all your energy blaming yourself and feeling guilty.
Okay, so what is this one? How would we use this one with even my best efforts aren't good enough? Could there be some extenuating factors that also played into it? It's not just my part, right? You know, if I want to accomplish something, but I'm not the only person involved in it, maybe my best efforts were good enough, but it didn't happen because of X, Y, and Z.
What else can be done to improve the situation?
Yeah, but what can I learn so the next time I do it or something like that? What can I learn from this? By the way, when I was in college, I was telling somebody this the other day. I was social vice president at PUC. And while I was there, I noticed very few people were coming to our events. People were too cool to come to college organized events. And so I realized, man, I feel like I'm failing at this job. So I got creative. And I realized, so has anybody ever been to a Warren Miller documentary before? Yeah, okay. So a Warren Miller documentary was going to be on our schedule, and I realized that only certain people would come to it, and I thought, you know, the reason why only a few people are coming to it is because whenever we always had the fashion show that goes with it. Somebody would donate clothes to, you know, to show off at it, and we'd have our little fashion show and everything. And I noticed that whoever was the social vice president would only invite their friends to be in the fashion show. I watched my predecessor do that. And so I thought, well, duh, no wonder nobody's coming to it because only the friends of the social vice president were actually doing it. So you know what I did? I invited a major person from every single social group at the college to be in the fashion show. So what do you think happened? All of their friends came to support their friend who was in the fashion show. None of the people in the fashion show hung out together normally. It was a failure up until then, but it taught me something. I could be strategic. By the way, strategery is one of my favorite things now. Even when my clients are having difficult times, I'm like, what could I do differently? What could I say differently? How about number 10?
List the advantages and disadvantages of a feeling, like getting angry when your plane is late. A negative thought, like no matter how hard I try, I always screw up. Or a behavior pattern, like overeating and lying around in bed when you're depressed. You can also use the cost-benefit analysis to modify a self-defeating belief, such as, I must always try to be perfect.
Okay, you know what? You actually already started to do this. We did this together. Because where's the cost-benefit analysis on the ABC sheet? The C. What is the cost of believing even my best efforts aren't good enough? Well, the cost is escapism, eating junk, reading bad stuff, silence, avoidance, procrastination, pouring myself into other things, distraction, and comparing, and you name it, down the list. Plus, the cost is also despair, frustration, gloom, hopelessness, fatigue, anger, bewilderment. Do I really want to hold on to this? By the way, what's the benefit of believing this, though? I wouldn't believe it if I didn't get a benefit from it.
Victim?
I get to be a victim, or I get to excuse myself from trying further. See, my best efforts aren't even good enough. I give up. What happens if everybody starts doing that?
Everything's gone.
I think our society kind of shows it, doesn't it? One of the biggest things that happens in our society when people are struggling with irrational beliefs is they stop working. I mean, literally, they stop working. When I've got these thoughts going through my head and I keep entertaining them over and over and over again, I don't have the capacity to take on anything else. And I see a lot of people go on disability. I see a lot of people stop trying in their relationships. They even give up in their marriages. Do you know that's one of the precursors to a lot of marriages ending? Even my best efforts aren't good enough. Can't please this person no matter what I do. How many things have I tried, though? I'm not saying you should just be about pleasing other people, but what if I'm not listening very well to what the other person wants? Maybe I need to bring in some help or some reinforcement. Maybe I need to sit down and go, okay, God, help me to listen this time and not be so defensive. Help me not to sabotage myself before I even listen to what they're saying. Right? What happens then when I do all of this? By the way, you know the 10 Commandments? You notice there's 10 ways to untwist your thinking? The 10 Commandments, what happens when we whittle them down to 2? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. What happens when we whittle all these 10 questions to 2? I ask myself, is this true? And is this helpful? If it's not moving me forward, it's keeping me stuck and holding me back, then I shouldn't believe it. You know, there are things that are even true, but I shouldn't keep repeating them to myself over and over again. What if I lose my job? I lost my job. How many times should I tell myself that? Should I keep reminding myself every single day when I wake up, when I'm going about brushing my teeth? You lost your job, you lost your job, you lost your job. What happens when you're focused on that? You're not focused on anything productive. So if your thoughts are holding you back, they're not allowing you to move forward, they're unhelpful. And our thoughts should always be true and helpful. They have to be true and helpful. Okay, so if it's not, then you have to change your belief. What would be a more accurate belief to believe? Besides, even my best efforts aren't good enough.
I've done my best.
Okay. Anybody else? By the way, there's not just one right answer. There's lots of different ways we could reframe this, if you want to call it that.
I did an experiment,
Mm-hmm.
and so I need to do more experiments.
Okay, okay.
I'm trying.
Listen. Yeah, I'm trying. What does the Bible say? A righteous man falls how many times? 7 times and gets back up.
Yeah, I don't have to be perfect.
Yeah, I don't have to be perfect. Sometimes it's not even just good enough. We're actually putting an extra standard on ourselves. We'll say we're not being good enough or it's not good enough, but what we're really saying is it's not perfect.
I'm continuing to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making progress.
Yeah. How about some of my efforts actually show some fruit? But not all of them show the same level of fruit, but that's okay. I'm trying still. Isn't that what everybody's doing? Okay. What happens, though, when we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ? Do you know that's what we're called to do? Every thought. We talk a lot about our health, our physical health, but do you ever think about your mental health? We have to take every thought captive. If it's not true and helpful, then it's not obedient to Christ. What happens, though? Effective change. When we have the right thoughts, when we're telling ourselves the right things, we're not going to feel the same way that we used to feel, and we're not going to do the same things that we used to do. We're going to have positive feelings, more positive feelings, and we're going to have more positive behaviors, right? And then, here's the kicker though. You know, most of us think that we can't change our activating events, but you know when you have different thinking, which means different behaviors and different emotions, do you know even the people in your life won't affect you the same way? When they say things and do things, it's not going to have the same impact. Politics is not going to have the same impact if you're a prudent person. Did you know that? Even your own thoughts and feelings, you're not watering them anymore, which means they're not growing. New ones are growing in their place. So that's what effective change is. I'm going to have new behaviors and new feelings because I have brand new thoughts, better thoughts. So I want to share with you, if you want any more of these sheets because you just want to keep doing them, there might be some left out there, but you can actually go on our website, Beautiful Minds, and actually it doesn't say on the bottom of your sheet, but it does say on this one, beautifulmindsoutpatient.com/resources. But if you want, you can just go on the resources page, and at the very top it says resources. Do you see at the top? Straight up from here. Resources. You have to click on it. Don't let it drag down because you're going to have other options. But if you just click on it, what's going to pop up is this page. And you'll have somebody called it the ABC trigger sheet, but that's what this is. So you can go and download as many of these as you want to and start practicing on all of the thoughts that you checked off on this one. And you can even come up with new ones to work on. I want to leave you with a thought, though, from Spirit of Prophecy. She says, you should acquire habits of self-control. Even your thoughts must be brought into subjection to the will of God, and your feelings under the control of reason and religion. Your imagination, in other words, your thinking, was not given you to be allowed to run riot and have its own way without any effort at restraint or discipline. And get this. So the person who came up with cognitive behavioral therapy came up with it in 1960s. Aaron Beck. When did she write this? Before 1915, we know that for sure. And what does she say? She says, if the thoughts are wrong, the feelings will be wrong, and the thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. How do we know somebody's moral character? Their behaviors, right? Was Erin Beck reading her writings? I don't think so. But we have everything we need to know in our church. It's beautiful. I want to leave you with that. Let's bow our heads. Dear Father in heaven, help everyone in this room. Forgive me for going over the time. But Lord, I ask that this be a blessing and that each one would leave this place having better thoughts and go out also and help others have better thoughts too. We thank you, Lord, for everything that you're doing in our lives and that you have been teaching us patiently each day, each one of us, how to think properly. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was so helpful. How many of you were blessed by this?
Amen. So on the very back table as you exit, I have some cards. In fact, can you guys grab the cards? Or you guys, yeah. Because I would like to know if this was a blessing to you, what other things you might be interested in that we could do. And the idea is we want to do this not just for our church to bless our church, and thanks Sparks for showing up too. Amen. It's a blessing to have this in the community, in our local faith community. But we want to also reach out to our community, our wider city, and our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers. Yes, that's the one. So I want to know if there are other things that you would like or be interested in that we could do that you think would be helpful for yourself or for members of our community. I'd be really interested in knowing what those may be. I know you already prayed us out, so that's the last thing. I just would be really interested in hearing also any feedback that you may have or ideas that you may have of what we could do. We did an experiment today. And so we want to learn from it and see what we could do in the future to bless our city and our community. So thank you for showing up, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.